Hey, welcome back to another show. I'm Michael Douglas. 3 songs from the 1980s you probably listened to on cassette tapes as a kid. And the reason why I know this is that before I really started buying compact discs, all that I could really afford, especially if I wanted music portability, up until I was probably a sophomore or junior in college, was the handy dandy cassette tape on your handy dandy Walkman, which came out in 1979, but by the mid to late 80s, it was very ubiquitous, very affordable, and you got your tunes with you even if they came on analog tapes. And I think these 3 songs really typify that ethic, especially among us Gen Xers as well. And the 1980s really was the era of the cassette tape. Music lovers, young and old, at the very least, had a cassette player in their car. Another reason to invest in these as well. And again, a cheaper alternative than getting a shiny new portable CD player installed in your car. And some of the earlier ones of those were problematic because they skipped when you hit a pothole, for example. Cassette really didn't have that problem, even if they were aftermarket. So, the people who were cassette completists in my generation not only had a player in their car, they had a boombox, they had a portable tape player of some sort, but I digress a little bit there. It was mostly where, what you could afford. You had to think about your lifestyle and said, this is the kind of player I'm going to use to accommodate the cassette tapes I'll buy. It was a revolutionary time, of course, for portable music, one that paved the way for CDs and eventually streaming in the 21st century. Now I want to take a look at a few songs that, people in my generations listened to via cassette tapes if you were a kid coming of age in the 1980s. Simple Minds with Don't You Forget About Me. This new wave pop rock jam just might be one of the most famous songs of the 1980s. Now, not only is this song a vital part of the famous film, The Breakfast Club, of course, a era-defining film, but it's also just an all-around beautifully produced piece of work, quite worthy of a #1 hit that was emblematic of that decade. Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds is a bona fide 1980s anthem. And it hit #1 in the US and Canada upon its release right smack dab in the middle of the 1980s, 1985. Now, I bet if you were a kid in the 1980s, you owned this jam on cassette and listened to it until the cassette no longer worked, or you started getting the slippage of the tape out of the cassette or whatever. And I did buy this. I bought it on the soundtrack. Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. The 1980s were a fantastic time for hard rock and glam metal, and Guns N' Roses was one of the biggest bands that fit into either genre in this decade. And in 1988, which incidentally is a year that CDs finally leapt ahead of cassettes and albums as the most bought configuration in this country, believe it or not, about 5 years after it came out. In 1988, Guns N' Roses dropped Sweet Child of Mine as a single, following the massive success of their 1987 album that came out the fall of that year, Appetite for Destruction. And this song just sounds like the 1980s, in particular 1980s rock. And more than a few young metalheads probably had this song on cassette at the tail end of the decade. Now, by this time, I started investing more into CDs. I bought this album on CD, never had it on cassette, but the conviction is there. That's why I've included it in this list. Finally, one of the best collaborations of the 1980s, David Bowie, Queen, Under Pressure. Maybe I'm a little biased here, but I love both Queen and David Bowie, of course. However, I really do think that this was one of the best collaborations of that decade. A ton of fans flocked in droves to buy this particular track via cassette tape. Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie is a gorgeous kind of dance rock tune with a solid message, especially at the end of the song. Don't believe me? Play it. It was a hefty hit as well, hitting #1 in the UK, and not in this country, but that's okay. It was top 10 in quite a few countries worldwide, and this was before it basically got bastardized and corrupted, so to speak, when it was used as a sample by this artist. And I actually talked about it on this particular episode of Dr. Pundits, you may want to do a search and watch that as well. So there you go. 3 great cassette-driven 1980s hits that were much more, I think, than the hit themselves. They were part of that whole cassette culture for people who couldn't afford CDs. Because, you have to think, vinyl was still strong in the late 80s, but it was, it was kind of on its way out. People who couldn't afford the hefty price of a CD, there were no CD singles or even cassette singles that were infiltrating the market until the early 90s. At the tail end of the 80s, perhaps 1989, the only other option to enjoy mobile music on the go, cassettes. And there you go. I'm Michael Douglas. If you like what you see here, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And as the late, great Barry White always used to say, let the music play. And I'll see you on the next episode.